I never thought a single sentence could hit harder than a slap, but Eleanor's words that night did just that. "You're just the affair baby, Bridget. Always have been." The room fell into a heavy silence, like the air itself had been sucked out. I felt my chest tighten, every breath catching as if I'd been punched. Daryl's smirk was slow and deliberate, like he'd been waiting for this moment, feeding off Eleanor's cruelty. Lisa shifted uncomfortably beside me, and I caught Daniel's clenched jaw from across the table. No one said a word. I wanted to respond, to defend myself, to shatter the charged stillness, but instead, I swallowed the sting, held my tongue. That was me, Bridget Reed, 37, the family's invisible thread, the silent provider who kept the lights on, the house paid, and the peace maintained. No recognition, just grudging acceptance, and moments like this, sharp reminders of my place. Being the stepchild in the Reed family has always meant living in the shadows. Growing up, I was the quiet one, always polite, always helpful, while Lisa, my older sister, earned applause and accolades. At 10, I remember sitting around the holiday table, watching my father heap praise on Lisa for her straight A's and college scholarships. I was just there, barely a whisper in the room. Eleanor was new then, her cold eyes flickering toward me with barely concealed disdain. I overheard her whispering about my illegitimate status, planting seeds of shame that would take root for years. My parents never defended me. Their silence was louder than any insult, and it stung more deeply. I tried to tell myself it was just bitterness or tough love that it would pass. But at my high school graduation, when Eleanor rolled up with a shiny car for Lisa and barely glanced my way, I felt a hollow ache. That night, alone in my room, tears slipped down my cheeks as I wondered if I'd ever truly belong in this family. Those early wounds shaped me. Instead of breaking me, they steeled my resolve, though no one around seemed to notice my efforts. I've given more to this family than anyone realizes. Over $120,000 has gone from my accounts into the old family home. Mortgage payments, property taxes, emergency repairs, all without complaint or fanfare. Last year, I canceled 2 vacations just to cover a $7,000 plumbing nightmare that threatened to flood the basement. I'm the one who drives Aunt Margaret to her doctor's appointments, tutors my younger cousins when they struggle in school, and even covered Daryl's bounced checks twice, hoping to keep the peace despite his constant undermining. Daniel, my husband, watches all this with a mixture of admiration and frustration. "Bridget, you deserve recognition, not silence," he tells me late at night, his voice thick with concern. But I've always believed that if I keep giving, keep holding this family together, maybe someday they'll see me as more than just the outsider. I hold the house's deeds quietly in my hands, a secret power I protect, unsure of when or how I might ever use it. Around me are all the players, the sister who shines, the stepmother who sneers, the husband who supports, and Daryl, lurking with his petty envy. That night, after Eleanor's cruel words, I felt a storm of emotions surging inside me. Shock, humiliation, anger, but I forced myself to stay calm. I told myself she was stressed, that it wasn't truly meant. I excused myself from the table, the eyes of the family following as I slipped quietly into the garden. The night air was cool, the scent of damp earth and blooming jasmine filling my lungs as I tried to steady my racing heart. For the first time at a family gathering, I refused to raise my glass for the toast, holding it down at my side instead. It was a small act, barely noticeable to anyone but me, but it marked the first flicker of defiance in a sea of silence. I wanted to disappear, to retreat from the crushing weight of their judgment. But a small, stubborn voice inside whispered that I didn't have to stay invisible forever. That night planted a seed of doubt, not just about them, but about me. How much longer could I keep pretending everything was okay? Daryl wasted no time after sensing my quiet resistance. Within days, the family atmosphere shifted, thick with whispers I could almost taste, bitter and cold like stale coffee left forgotten on the counter. At every gathering, I caught snippets of conversation trailing off as I approached. "Bridget's too sensitive," always playing the victim, not a real read. The words weren't just idle gossip. They were carefully planted poison, and Daryl's reach went deeper than I imagined. Cousins I'd shared birthdays with suddenly asked pointed questions, their smiles thin and suspicious. Even Lisa, usually my quiet ally, seemed to waver, caught in the crossfire of Daryl's subtle manipulation. One evening at a family barbecue, I found myself cornered by Aunt Margaret and her husband, who had always been warm before. "Bridget, maybe you're just imagining things," Aunt Margaret whispered, eyes flickering toward Daryl. "Families have their troubles, but you've got to stop stirring drama." Her words pricked at me like thorns. Was I truly overreacting? The gaslighting began to gnaw at my confidence, turning my own feelings into doubts. The familiar warmth of the family I'd supported, the one I'd poured money and care into, felt like it was draining out, replaced by this cold, isolating silence. Lisa later pulled me aside, her voice low and hesitant. "Bridget, maybe if you calm down, things wouldn't be so tense," she said, her eyes flickering with uncertainty. "You've got to stop seeing enemies where there aren't any." The sting wasn't just in her words, but in her tone. Sympathetic, yet cautious, as if she feared I might unravel. I wanted to argue, to tell her I wasn't the enemy, but the doubt had seeped into me, whispering that maybe I was the problem. The family I'd quietly held together was fracturing, and Daryl's silent power was tightening its grip, leaving me increasingly alone in this familiar crowd. I clenched my fists, tasting bitterness and disbelief. But beneath it all, a steady ember of resolve refused to die out. Determined to break the spiral of misunderstanding, I invited Eleanor and Lisa to my home, hoping for a calm, honest conversation. I laid out the financial records, the receipts, the bank statements, everything transparent, proof of my contributions and sacrifices. "I'm not asking for praise," I said quietly, meeting Eleanor's guarded gaze. "I just want acknowledgement. I want you to understand the hurt those words caused." Eleanor's face twisted with something I couldn't quite place. A mix of sorrow and calculation. Tears welled, but they were crocodile tears, dripping with false innocence. "I only spoke out because I'm scared," she claimed, her voice shaking. "This family's legacy is all I have. I'm afraid it's being stolen." Lisa chimed in with a dismissive shake of her head. "Bridget, you're blowing this way out of proportion," she said firmly. "We're all worried about the family's future, but you're making it a personal attack." The weight of their combined judgment pinned me down like a stone. My father, aging and worn, sat quietly, interjecting with a tired sigh. "Let it go, Bridget. For peace's sake. Sometimes you have to bite your tongue." His words stung more than any insult. The man who was supposed to be my anchor was telling me to disappear. I left that evening feeling smaller, invisible, unheard, not by accident, but by design. Reason, it seemed, was powerless here. Weeks passed, and the tension only escalated. At the local charity gala where I volunteered, the place where I'd always strived to build bridges, Daryl launched his cruelest assault yet. He circulated a whisper, a venomous rumor that I was faking my family connections to leverage donations. The idea struck me like a slap in the face. My years of quiet service and personal sacrifice reduced to a lie. Worse still, he paraded private family details, including my recent mortgage payments, spinning them as buying influence to manipulate donors. I overheard gasps from professional contacts I'd trusted, saw the flicker of doubt in their eyes. The fallout was immediate and brutal. One major donor withdrew a $15,000 pledge, citing concerns about ethical transparency. Daniel confronted Daryl in a tense hallway exchange, his voice low but furious. Daryl just shrugged with that infuriating smirk, denying everything with icy calm. The betrayal was no mistake. It was a cold, calculated strike designed to shatter my reputation and destabilize my financial footing. I felt the room closing in around me, the weight of Daryl's treachery crushing not just my standing, but my sense of self-worth. That night, as I sat alone in my dimly lit living room, the silence was deafening, filled with the echoes of false accusations and shattered trust. Despite everything, I sought a way out of the spiral. I reached out to Daryl, hoping to bridge the vast chasm between us. We met privately, a tense, fragile truce hanging in the air. I offered him help with his financial troubles, a gesture of goodwill rooted in family loyalty. "We're family," I told him steadily, looking past his guarded expression. "I need respect, not rivalry." For a moment, I thought maybe there was hope, that beneath the layers of bitterness he might choose a different path, but his laughter shattered that illusion, cold and hollow. "You've been useful, Bridget," he sneered, "but you'll never be one of us." The words cut deeper than any insult before. A final, irrevocable rejection. I pleaded for a truce, for peace, for anything that could end this war. He dismissed me with a cruel smile, his eyes gleaming with triumph. That night, as I locked the door behind me, I understood something painful but necessary. I had done all I could to heal the wounds, but some lines, once crossed, could never be uncrossed. No forgiveness awaited me in this family, only continued betrayal, and the lonely task of standing tall amidst the ruins. Yet even in that cold darkness, a stubborn flicker of resilience stayed alive, waiting, watching, refusing to be extinguished. The fallout hit me like a freight train. After I laid my cards on the table, hoping for understanding, the family's response was worse than I imagined. Daryl twisted my vulnerability into proof of weakness. Suddenly, every whispered conversation felt like a blade sliding through my skin. "She's too sensitive," they said. Always playing the victim, even Lisa's support, though hesitant before, began to waver under the mounting pressure. One evening, she pulled me aside, her voice low and uncertain. "Maybe you're seeing things that aren't there, Bridget. Maybe you need to step back." Her words were gentle, but they felt like betrayal. My shoulders slumped, and the warmth that once held me in their circle drained away, replaced by a cold, isolating silence. I found myself retreating into the house I'd kept afloat with my own hard-earned money. The quiet was deafening. I'd always prided myself on being the family's backbone, the silent provider who never asked for credit. But now, I felt like a ghost, unseen, unheard, unwanted. The laughter at family dinners cut through me like glass shards, the smiles hiding knives behind eyes that once looked at me with kindness. Even Aunt Margaret, whose hugs used to feel like home, now greeted me with a polite nod and averted gaze. I wrestled with this growing self-doubt. Was I really the problem? Was my desire for acknowledgement unreasonable? The seed of uncertainty took root, twisting inside me like a vine choking every ounce of hope. At night, I lay awake, the walls closing in as my mind spun through every harsh word, every cold glance. The house was quiet except for the ticking clock on the wall, a relentless reminder of time slipping away, of connections breaking, of my place unraveling. I thought about Daniel's steady presence beside me, his quiet support the only light in this gathering storm. "You're not alone," he whispered once when I felt like disappearing forever. But even his reassurance couldn't fully chase away the shadows creeping into my heart. The family I had dreamed of belonging to was slipping through my fingers, replaced by a cold uncertainty that left me hollow and unmoored. I realized then that the hope I'd clung to, for acceptance, for peace, was dying, and with it, pieces of me were breaking too. The night of the family meeting was the breaking point. We gathered under the pretense of resolving tensions, but the air was thick with stolen glances and half-hidden agendas. When the documents were laid bare, my breath caught in my throat. There it was, proof that Daryl had siphoned $50,000 from the family trust, a fund meant for all siblings, redirected to cover his mounting debts. Worse still, Eleanor had signed off on the transfer, fully aware, hiding the betrayal from everyone, including my father and Lisa. I stared at the papers, my hands trembling, the weight of their duplicity crashing down like a tidal wave. The house I'd fought so hard to protect, still under my name, was suddenly threatened by liens and legal battles because of their deceit. In that moment, something inside me shattered, not with a shout or a sob, but with a cold, piercing clarity that cut through the pain like ice. I looked around the room, meeting my father's downcast eyes and Lisa's stunned silence. No one defended me. No one offered comfort. The family I'd tried to save was a battlefield, and I was the enemy. The walls felt like they closed in tighter, suffocating in their silence. Anguish gave way to a numb resolve as I realized the truth I'd refused to face. Trust was a weapon wielded against me, and hope was a luxury I could no longer afford. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage, a symbol of everything I was losing. But beneath the crushing weight of betrayal, a cold clarity emerged. I was done being the victim. The old wounds hardened into steel inside me, and as the night deepened, so did my resolve. The family I knew was gone, and in its place, something unbreakable was born. Alone in the quiet of my room that night, I replayed years of sacrifice against the backdrop of lies and deceit that now defined my reality. Pain twisted inside me, raw and aching, but it was quickly joined by something sharper: anger. Not the wild, uncontrolled rage that consumes and destroys, but a steady, simmering fire that burned with purpose. I saw the pattern for the first time, clear and cruel. Eleanor and Daryl, two sides of the same coin, had plotted together, cloaking their selfish ambitions in the guise of family loyalty. The realization stung, but it also ignited a fierce determination. I whispered quietly into the darkness, "Never again." Those words felt like chains snapping loose, freeing me from the weight of old wounds. The house I'd poured my heart and money into was no longer just a home. It was my leverage, my foothold in this fractured family landscape. The power it represented was not something I'd wield recklessly, but something I would use to reclaim control. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a shift inside, a transformation from wounded victim to strategist, from silent sufferer to someone ready to fight back. The quiet night held my vow, and with it, a new identity started to form, not the stepchild forgotten in the shadows, but a force they would have to reckon with. The pain still lingered, but it no longer defined me. I was ready to act. The next morning, I sought out Daniel, needing to share this new clarity with someone who understood the stakes. We sat across from each other in the sunlit kitchen, cups of coffee cooling between our hands. "It's time," I said quietly, my voice steady. "We can't just react anymore. We have to be strategic, quiet, deliberate." Daniel nodded, his eyes serious but supportive. "How do you want to start?" he asked. I laid out the plan that had been forming in my mind overnight. We'll dismantle their alliances without shouting accusations. Instead, we'll present facts, undeniable evidence. We'll turn the family against them through truth, not drama. His gaze sharpened with cautious optimism. "And Eleanor?" he asked. "She's the enabler," I said firmly. "She needs to see the consequences of her choices." We agreed to document everything meticulously, gathering every shred of proof we could find. I would reach out carefully to relatives who might still have doubt, planting seeds of truth to unravel the web Daryl and Eleanor had woven. It wasn't about petty revenge. It was about reclaiming what was rightfully mine and exposing the rot hidden beneath the family's polished exterior. For the first time in weeks, I sat straighter, feeling the weight of command settle on my shoulders. Not as a burden, but as a mantle. This was my fight, and I would meet it head on. The quiet warrior inside me had awakened, and there was no turning back. The night I finally sat down with the financial records spread across my kitchen table, a strange clarity settled over me. Every bill, every bank statement, every whispered favor came into sharp focus like pieces in a puzzle I'd been trying to solve in the dark. I mapped out dependencies. The house was the hub for family gatherings, the invisible anchor holding them all together. I'd been quietly covering debts that no one else dared to mention, settling bills behind the scenes to keep the fragile peace. And the messages. Oh, those messages. Texts and emails where family members poured out their troubles, confiding in me because I was the one they trusted. The weight of it crushed me, but also steeled me. They needed me more than I ever needed them. I knew I couldn't do this alone, so I reached out to a trusted attorney, someone who had handled complex family estates before. Sitting in her sleek office, I laid everything out: the house title, the forged transfers, the financial irregularities. She nodded slowly, confirming what I suspected. The law was on my side, and Daryl's actions were not just reckless, but actionable. We discussed the implications, the paths to reclaim my security and expose the fraud. Back at home, I cataloged every message where Daryl begged relatives for money, His desperation laid bare in his own words. There was no mistaking it now. I held the evidence, the undeniable proof of their betrayal. It was more than just family drama. It was a weapon, and I intended to use it. Late into the nights, I pored over the details, the quiet space around me thick with tension. The house, usually a sanctuary, felt charged with electricity as I documented every contact, every transaction that didn't add up. The betrayal sank deeper with each discovery, but so did my resolve. I whispered to myself, "You've got the truth. You've got the power." It felt surreal, this shift from victim to strategist, but I welcomed it. The family had leaned on me for so long. I'd been the silent backbone, the one who fixed things without complaint. But the time for fixing had passed. Now, it was time for reckoning. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. The knowledge was mine alone, locked away like a secret weapon. I imagined the faces of those who had scorned me, the casual dismissals, the cold shoulders. They thought I was weak. They thought I'd crumble. But beneath the calm surface, every detail I uncovered was a step closer to reclaiming my dignity. In the quiet of my home, surrounded by piles of documents and glowing screens, I felt a strange kinship to the woman I was becoming, calm, calculated, and undeniably strong. The days that followed were a study in contrasts. Outwardly, I smiled and nodded at family gatherings, careful to mask the storm building inside me. I changed passwords on shared accounts, banking, email, even the family group chats. Each new password was a silent assertion of control, a reclaiming of boundaries once crossed without consent. I updated my legal documents, making sure my property claims were airtight, safeguards in place that even Daryl couldn't undo. I arranged for an audit to examine suspicious transactions, knowing the truth would soon surface in cold, hard numbers. At family dinners, I maintained a serene facade, sipping wine and exchanging pleasantries, while my mind raced with plans and contingencies. Daryl and Eleanor floated around, oblivious to the quiet fortress I was building behind their backs. No one suspected the shift beneath my composed exterior. The family saw only the same forgiving Bridget, the one who smiled through the tension. But beneath that veneer, I was a time bomb, ticking relentlessly toward justice. The calm was a thin veil, a fragile peace before the storm I was readying. In those moments, I reminded myself to breathe, to steady my voice, to hold my head high. This was no longer about being the wounded stepchild. This was about survival, about reclaiming what was mine with dignity intact. Then, in a moment that felt both accidental and inevitable, I stumbled upon the twist that shattered everything I thought I knew. I was digging through old emails, searching for any overlooked detail, when I found a thread that made my blood run cold. Eleanor and Daryl, once portrayed as bitter rivals, had been quietly collaborating for years. The emails revealed a pattern of covert cooperation. Family funds funneled into Daryl's secret accounts, transfers signed off by Eleanor with an ease that betrayed their shared knowledge. They had been weaving a web of deceit beneath the family's surface, playing roles to keep the rest of us blind. The betrayal cut deeper than the financial theft. Lisa, my dear Lisa, had been unwittingly drawn into their scheme, manipulated into supporting Daryl's plans under the guise of family loyalty. Reading her name in those emails, I felt a fresh stab of heartbreak. She had believed in them, trusted them, and been used as a pawn in their game. The realization settled like a weight in my chest. The enemy wasn't just Daryl. It was a conspiracy, a hidden alliance that had turned the family against me. The depth of their treachery galvanized me. Revenge was no longer a choice. It was a necessity, urgent and undeniable. I sat back, the screen's glow casting long shadows across the room, my mind racing with the implications. The battlefield had expanded, and so had my resolve. The pain of betrayal mingled with a fierce clarity. I would expose their lies, not just for myself, but for everyone who had been deceived. This wasn't petty family drama. This was a fight for truth, and I was ready to lead it. I whispered into the silence, "No more hiding, no more silence." The quiet that followed was thick with possibility, the calm before a reckoning that I intended to deliver. With the evidence in hand and my resolve steeling like tempered steel, I began the first moves of my plan. The financial support I had been providing, the silent safety net for the family's debts and expenses, was the first to go. I stopped covering bills, stopped answering pleas for help that once came with gratitude but now carried entitlement. Family events I had meticulously organized started unraveling. I withheld funds and logistical support, watching as cracks appeared in the carefully maintained facade of normalcy. The absence of my support was a quiet but unmistakable blow. Behind closed doors, I discreetly reached out to relatives I still trusted, sharing what I could without exposing the full scope, just enough to plant seeds of doubt about Daryl and Eleanor's stories. I wanted the truth to seep in slowly, dismantling their carefully crafted narrative from within. It was a strategic retreat disguised as silence, a way to destabilize their hold on the family before striking harder. The tension built like a storm gathering on the horizon, invisible to most, but undeniable to me. The first direct consequence hit Daryl like a shockwave. Thanks to my attorney's intervention, his credit lines were frozen. Financial institutions alerted to suspicious activity linked to his accounts. It was a subtle but crippling restriction, a warning shot fired without fanfare. At family functions, I maintained my composure, the calm eye in the swirling storm. No one saw the satisfaction behind my steady gaze, the quiet triumph in each measured word. Daniel watched me with a mixture of admiration and pride, his belief in me unwavering. He saw the transformation, the woman he loved becoming a force to be reckoned with. The first moves were subtle, but they sent a clear message. I was no longer the silent victim. I was the strategist, and the game had changed. The family council meeting was a storm waiting to break, and when I finally stood up, the weight of everything I'd uncovered settled heavily on my shoulders. I cleared my throat, the rustle of papers in my hand louder than I expected. The room, filled with relatives whose faces wore expressions ranging from curiosity to thinly veiled hostility, fell into a heavy silence. "I want to share something important," I began, voice steady but cutting through the tension like a scalpel. I laid out the bank statements, the emails, the legal documents one by one, watching as disbelief flickered across faces. Daryl's smug smirk, his usual shield, cracked imperceptibly, his eyes narrowing as each truth landed with impact. "I've been the backbone of this family, the silent keeper of its peace and prosperity," I said quietly, meeting my father's downcast gaze and Lisa's conflicted eyes. But I refuse to be the scapegoat for their betrayal any longer. This house, this legacy, is mine, and I demand accountability. The room shifted. Whispers fluttered like uneasy birds in the quiet air. Lisa shifted, her glance away from Daryl like a tremor breaking in the ice. I could see the cracks forming in the foundation of his support. Family members exchanged looks, some nodding subtly, others caught between loyalty and truth. For the first time, the power was palpably mine, and I wielded it with calm dignity, not rage. Daryl's posture tensed, the lines of arrogance fading to something raw and exposed. He opened his mouth, surely to deny or accuse, but I held up a hand. "There's nothing left to say," I told him, voice firm but controlled. "The evidence speaks for itself." The room held its breath, the usual chatter of family politics replaced by a heavy stillness. I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration wash over me. After years of silence and sacrifice, this was my moment, the reckoning none of us saw coming but all needed. I stood tall, no longer invisible or powerless, but a force demanding respect. The tension was electric, the air thick with unsaid grievances and shattered assumptions. As I gathered my documents, the weight lifted slightly from my chest. The family, fractured and fragile, had been forced to confront a truth they had ignored too long. In that charged silence, I realized the battle was far from over, but the ground beneath me had shifted irrevocably. For once, I was the one holding the cards, and I knew exactly how to play them. The aftermath was swift and unforgiving. Daryl's carefully constructed world began to crumble in the wake of my revelations. Bank accounts he'd hidden were frozen, creditors suddenly reappearing like vultures, business partners withdrew, nervous whispers turning into outright shunning. Family members who had once turned a blind eye now recoiled, distancing themselves with cold efficiency. My phone lit up relentlessly, calls filled with apologies, explanations, desperate pleas, but I kept my responses brief, unwavering. Boundaries had been crossed one too many times. It was time for walls to be built. Eleanor, once the quiet enabler, found herself isolated and questioned by relatives who no longer accepted her silence or complicity. Her smile faltered at gatherings, replaced by anxious glances and whispered doubts. It was a slow unraveling, a dismantling of the web she had helped spin. I didn't relish their downfall. I never did. But I recognized it as justice, the natural consequence of their betrayals. The liens on the house were cleared with legal precision, control returning to my hands piece by piece. The collapse of their empire was painful to witness, but I refused to gloat. This was about reclaiming my dignity, not inflicting cruelty. I noticed subtle shifts in family dynamics too. Some relatives approached with tentative apologies, their eyes filled with regret, as if seeking forgiveness for their blindness. I listened politely, acknowledging their words without opening old wounds. My focus remained steady. This was about healing, yes, but on my terms. The house, once a battlefield, began to feel like a home again, a symbol of resilience rather than defeat. I breathed deeply, savoring the quiet strength that had carried me through this storm. The journey to this point had been brutal, but it had forged something unbreakable inside me. Daryl's desperation escalated like a dark tide rising. Lawsuits were threatened in angry, stilted letters. Emotional blackmail seeped through family channels, painting himself as the victim in a twisted narrative. He declared himself wronged in public forums, seeking sympathy in social circles where he once held sway. But I was ready. Legal counsel stood guard like a shield, and trusted family allies whispered warnings, cutting off his attempts to isolate me. The flying monkeys, those who took his side blindly, intensified their harassment, but their efforts were futile against the fortress I'd built around myself. Some distant relatives, once tangled in Daryl's web, reached out with apologies that felt genuine, their voices tinged with regret for having enabled him. I heard them, thanked them quietly, but never allowed those interactions to weaken my resolve. Daryl's isolation became more pronounced with each passing day. His allies fell away like dead leaves in autumn. His facade, once so carefully maintained, cracked under the weight of his failures. Each attempt to manipulate or intimidate crashed harmlessly against my newfound strength. I stood firm, not as a victim, but as the architect of his downfall, unshaken and resolute. 6 months later, peace had settled over my life like the soft glow of dawn after a long night. Daniel and I had grown closer, freed from the shackles of family drama that once threatened to consume us. Our mornings were quiet, filled with laughter and shared plans rather than whispered worries. My contact with the family was limited and carefully managed, bound by firm boundaries that demanded respect and honesty. Eleanor had retreated into the shadows, her presence diminished, while Daryl faced ongoing legal and social consequences that kept him at arm's length. The storm had passed, leaving a calm I'd never known before. I often reflected on the journey, not with bitterness, but with a quiet satisfaction that came from reclaiming my life and my dignity. I no longer felt the sting of being the affair baby or the unwanted stepchild. I was Bridget Reed, a woman respected for her strength and her unwavering resolve. The chaotic family reunions I once endured now felt like distant memories, replaced by a serene autonomy I cherished deeply. I didn't need to prove myself anymore. The truth had spoken, and I had listened. In that peaceful space, I was free, not just from them, but from the chains of my past. And for the first time in a long while, I was home.